The Federal Communications Commission has abandoned a plan to place government monitors in newsrooms, at least for now. The plan would have had the FCC asking questions about why journalists decide to cover certain stories. But as Paul Strand found out, First Amendment defenders are concerned even though the plan is on hold. This threat to freedom of the press may not be completely dead.
FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai blew the whistle on his own agency, revealing in the Wall Street Journal the FCC would be sending researchers into newsrooms and grilling journalists about their news choices.
How do you decide to cover certain stories? What's your news philosophy? Does your station have a perceived bias? And those are questions I don't think belong in any newsroom, and certainly not when posed by the government.
Supposedly cooperating with these monitors would be voluntary. But when a big agency like the FCC has the power to revoke your broadcast license, that's a lot of pressure to play along and do what your government wants. Attorney Matthew Clark at the American Center for Law and Justice saw the monitoring scheme as a clear danger to the First Amendment.
It protects the American people from having a federal government that would promote its own agenda through the press, forcing the press to cover the stories that it wants it to cover, that it believes that the American people need to know about.
But I certainly found it to be threatening to our First Amendment values.
One thing these monitors would be finding out is if news outlets were covering 8 specific areas government has deemed critical, which Pai thinks would be mighty intimidating.
That was part of the concern, too, that news coverage ultimately could be slanted towards those 8 categories for fear of offending some sort of government monitor.
Pai and Clark both cheered when the FCC backed down in the face of a huge public outcry, like more than 80,000 people signing an ACLJ petition protesting the scheme.
When the American people stand up with one voice and say no FCC monitors in the newsrooms of the American people, that really made a huge difference.
Pai rejoiced at this particular promise.
That neither this study nor any future study would involve the government or researchers hired by the government posing questions to media owners, to news directors, or to news reporters about any of these kinds of questions.
But these First Amendment defenders worry this fight may not be permanently over.
It is important to stay vigilant.
I make the analogy to a baseball game. When a baseball game is suspended, that doesn't mean it's canceled. It just means that a play is going to resume at some later time.
Some see it as no coincidence this monitoring plan was coming from the same administration whose IRS was holding up tax-exempt status for Tea Party and conservative groups and grilling them about their motives.
It is just an overarching philosophy of trying to silence the opposition and to control both the media and what is being able to be broadcast or being able to be talked about amongst the American public.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.